The phone screamed at 2:47 a.m., not rang, screamed, a sharp, shrill sound that sliced through sleep and pulled Bumpy Johnson out of darkness with his heart already pounding. No one called at that hour with good news. His hand fumbled in the dark, missing the receiver once before grabbing it, while his other hand slid automatically to the .45 on the nightstand. Muscle memory, survival. 20 years of living where hesitation meant death. He said nothing, just listened. On the other end there was breathing, heavy and uneven, too many people sharing the same air. It told him everything before a single word was spoken. Men standing close together, waiting. When the voice finally came, it was calm, southern, slow like thick syrup poured carefully. "Mr. Johnson," it said, "you listening?" Bumpy sat up fully now, eyes open, jaw tight. "Who is this?" Silence followed, then a quiet chuckle. "You'll know soon enough. Right now, you need to hear something." There was movement in the background. Something heavy dragged across a hard surface. Concrete. A muffled sound followed, like someone trying to speak through cloth. Bumpy's stomach tightened. He knew that sound. The cloth came off, and the muffled noise turned into choking gasps, then a voice he recognized instantly. Marcus Washington, the man who laughed too loud, slapped backs too hard, and made every room brighter just by being in it. Now his voice trembled, stripped of all confidence. "Bumpy," Marcus said, breath ragged, terror naked in every syllable. "They got me. They're gonna—" The line cut abruptly, replaced by another calm voice, the same southern drawl, steady as a man discussing the weather. "Your friend made a mistake. Wrong place, wrong time. Talked to the wrong people." Bumpy's grip tightened until his knuckles burned. "Where is he demanded. The answer came without hesitation. "Somewhere you won't reach. Not in time." Boots scraped against wood. Someone whimpered. Then came a sound Bumpy recognized immediately, one that crawled up his spine and settled deep in his chest. Liquid splashing. Thick, heavy, not water, gasoline. Even through the phone, memory filled in the smell, sharp and choking. "You hear that?" the voice asked, amusement bleeding through. 10 gallons. Your friend's standing right in the middle of it, all tied up, can't move." Marcus began to cry now, words tumbling over each other, begging, apologizing, promising anything. "Please, Bumpy. Please help me." The man laughed softly. "You touch him, we light him. Hell, we're gonna do more than touch him anyway." A match scratched. That tiny sound was louder than a gunshot. "No!" Bumpy shouted, but it meant nothing. The ignition came with a hollow whoosh, and Marcus's scream ripped through the line. The sound that followed wasn't language. It wasn't even human. It was raw, animal noise, the sound of a body realizing it was being destroyed from the outside in. Bumpy pressed the phone hard against his ear, desperate, trying to hear anything beneath the screaming that might tell him where this was happening. There was nothing, just laughter. 6 men, maybe more, laughing like this was entertainment. The southern voice returned, calm and satisfied. "Listen good, Mr. Johnson. This is what happens when colored folks forget their place." Marcus's screams weakened, turning hoarse, then broken. The man narrated it like a lesson. Skin peels first, then the fat melts, runs like candle wax. Muscle cooks after that. Bumpy's voice came out low and steady, colder than winter steel. "I'm going to find you." The laughter grew louder. "We're counting on it." Marcus's screams faded into choking breaths, then wet, ragged sounds, then nothing at all. Silence stretched, heavy and final. "He's done," the man said, almost proud. 4 minutes and 8 seconds. He paused, then continued, voice turning intimate, like sharing a secret. "My name's Thomas Whitmore. Used to be sheriff in Alabama. Organized 17 lynchings. Nobody stopped me. That's how the world works." The line went dead with a sharp click. Bumpy stood in the dark, dial tone humming, the sounds replaying in his head on a loop that would never stop. The screams, the laughter, the fire. They burned themselves into him, permanent as scars. He lowered the phone slowly, hands steady despite the storm inside him. Mame sat up in bed, reaching for the lamp, fear already written on her face. "Bumpy? What happened?" He couldn't answer at first. The sounds were still there, echoing. Finally he walked to the window and looked out over Harlem, quiet beneath the night sky. Somewhere out there, Marcus Washington's body was still smoking. Somewhere out there, 6 men were celebrating. He picked up the phone again and dialed. Illinois Gordon answered on the first ring. "Get everyone," Bumpy said. "My office, 1 hour." Illinois didn't ask questions. "I'm on my way." Bumpy hung up and turned back to Mame, who was crying silently now, thinking of Marcus's wife, of his 2 little daughters. "What are you going to do?" she whispered. Bumpy's eyes stayed on Harlem. "I'm going to find them," he said. "All of them." They found Marcus's body 7 hours later, not because Bumpy's men stopped searching, but because the killers wanted it found. They left him in an empty lot in the heart of Harlem, a message carved in burned flesh. Mrs. Patterson saw the smoke first on her way to work, thought it was trash burning until she got close enough to understand. Her scream brought others running. By mid-morning, 200 people stood in a silent circle around what was left of Marcus Washington. Illinois Gordon pushed through the crowd, dread growing with every step. The body lay spread wide, as if trying to pull away from the fire. Skin charred and split, clothes gone to ash. The face melted into something unrecognizable, teeth bared white in an eternal scream. A cardboard sign lay nearby, words written in red paint spelling out a warning. The police arrived without urgency. Detective Brennan looked once and nodded, as if confirming something he already knew. "Nothing I can do," he said quietly. "No witnesses, no fingerprints." Illinois stared at him. "You're not even going to investigate?" Brennan lowered his voice. "Tell Bumpy I understand what he's about to do. We won't stop him. We just won't help." When Bumpy arrived, the crowd parted without a word. He told Illinois to move the jacket. He knelt, touched Marcus's shoulder, ash flaking under his fingers. He stayed there for 2 full minutes, then stood and faced the crowd. "They did this to scare us," he said softly. "They think fear will work." His eyes hardened. "They're wrong. This doesn't end with Marcus. This starts with him." Marcus's funeral came 3 days later, grief heavy as stone. The church overflow. Wed, voices rising and breaking together. The casket stayed closed. After the last amen faded, Bumpy remained seated, unmoving, while others filed out. Illinois found him there, eyes dark, jaw set. "The men are ready," Illinois said quietly. Bumpy stood slowly. "Good," he replied. Outside, Harlem moved as one, whispering, watching, remembering. The message the killers wanted to send had been received, but they had misunderstood something fundamental. Fear could start things, but it didn't end them. Not here, not now, not with Bumpy Johnson still breathing. Somewhere in the city, 6 men slept believing themselves untouchable. They were wrong. Harlem had chosen its answer, and it was already moving. The hunt began quietly, the way all serious work did. No speeches, no bravado, just men moving through Harlem like blood through veins. Bumpy didn't need maps or files. He needed memory, money, and loyalty, and Harlem had all 3. Illinois Gordon started with the phone company, walking in calm and respectful, wearing a clean suit and a neutral face. When rules were mentioned, he nodded. When laws were explained, he listened. Then he placed $500 on the counter, crisp and patient. The clerk stared at the money longer than he stared at Illinois. 20 minutes later, a location was written down in neat handwriting. A payphone, Brooklyn, Atlantic Avenue and Smith Street. Illinois folded the paper carefully, as if it were fragile. Outside, he lit a cigarette and exhaled. D slowly. 1 thread found. Harlem always unraveled things 1 thread at a time. The payphone stood where the clerk said it would, chipped and scarred, like it had heard too much of the world already. Illinois spent the afternoon asking questions the right way, not pushing, not threatening. Shop owners shrugged. Factory workers avoided eye contact. Fear was thick in Brooklyn, too. Then a janitor spoke up, an older man with tired eyes and a broom in his hands. He remembered a white truck parked near the phone late that night. 6 men, maybe 7, laughing, too loud for the hour. Illinois asked about markings. The janitor frowned, searching his memory. "Something on the side," he said finally. "Couldn't read it in the dark." Illinois asked which way they went. The janitor pointed south, Red Hook. Illinois thanked him and slipped him some money. As he walked away, he felt it settle in his bones. They were getting close. Red Hook smelled like rust, salt, and secrets. Quick Jackson spent the next day there, blending in, asking careful questions in bars and on docks. Most people said nothing. One dock worker mentioned smoke around 3 in the morning, drifting from an old warehouse on Van Brunt Street. Didn't smell like trash, the man said. Smelled like meat. That was enough. Quick found the building easily. The door had been kicked in, the concrete floor blackened and cracked from extreme heat. In the center lay a melted belt buckle, warped but still legible. M.W. Marcus Washington. On the wall, drawn in charcoal, was a burning cross. Quick stood there longer than necessary, jaw tight, fists clenched. He didn't touch anything. He didn't need to. The warehouse itself was a confession. That night, Willie Lee watched the building from across the street, patience carved into him by years of violence. At 11, a man arrived alone, nervous, checking the damage like someone returning to a crime scene. Willie followed him when he left, staying far enough back to be invisible. The man's name was Raymond Hollis, a worker at a meat-packing plant. He never saw Willie until it was too late. They took him to a safe place where Illinois and Bumpy waited. Hollis denied everything until Willie broke his fingers one by one, methodical and quiet. After 2 hours, Hollis was sobbing, words spilling out between screams. He gave names: Bobby Lee Crawford, Vernon Tucker. He said Thomas Whitmore kept them separated on purpose. Bumpy listened without interrupting, memorizing every detail. When Hollis finally collapsed into exhausted silence, Bumpy nodded once. "We'll be back," he said. Hollis cried harder at that than at the pain. Crawford broke faster. Fear worked better than force with him. He gave up James Patterson and Earl Dixon, shaking so badly he could barely speak. By the third night, Bumpy had 6 faces spread across his desk, each one studied, memorized, judged. Thomas Whitmore stared back from one photograph, eyes cold, mouth set in a familiar kind of cruelty. Bumpy didn't look angry. He looked focused. Marcus's funeral came the next morning, grief heavy and sharp. The church overflowed, the casket stayed closed. Reverend Powell spoke of murder, not death, and the congregation answered with voices that shook the walls. When Powell spoke of justice that didn't wear a badge, his eyes found Bumpy's, and they held for a long moment. Everyone understood what was being said without a single name spoken. After the service, after the burial, after the last handshakes and quiet condolences, Bumpy stayed behind in the empty church. Illinois found him sitting alone, hands clasped, eyes distant. "The men are ready," Illinois said. "How many?" 15. Bumpy nodded. Good. There was no hesitation, no doubt. Grief had already hardened into purpose. Outside, Harlem moved slowly, people watching, whispering. Word spread the way it always did, not through announcements but through looks and silences. Something was coming. People didn't know the details, but they knew the shape of it. That night, Bumpy stood at his window again, looking out over the neighborhood, thinking of Marcus, of the sound of fire, of laughter on the phone. Tomorrow, the first debt would be paid. Raymond Hollis believed he'd been spared. He was wrong. At 2 a.m, during his smoke break, Marcus Cole stepped out of the shadows and struck him in the throat. Hollis dropped instantly, unable to scream or breathe. They dragged him into a van and drove him back to the Red Hook warehouse. The floor still smelled like death. They tied him to a metal chair and waited for him to wake. When he did, Bumpy stood in front of him, face unreadable. Hollis begged, promised money, information, anything. Willie Lee poured gasoline over him, the smell filling the room. Bumpy struck a match and dropped it without ceremony. The fire took Hollis fast. Bumpy timed it carefully. 4 minutes and 12 seconds. When it was over, they pinned a note to what was left. 1 down, 5 to go. Bobby Lee Crawford was next. Drunk and careless, he never saw Quick Jackson in the alley. They took him to the same warehouse. Hollis's body was still there, a blackened warning. Crawford vomited before they even touched him. No speeches, no questions. Gasoline, match, fire. 4 minutes exactly. Vernon Tucker followed that same night, taken to the empty lot where Marcus had burned, tied to a chair in the same place. He tried praying. He didn't finish. 4 minutes and 22 seconds. They left him there with a note. 3 down. The message was spreading now, even among those who didn't know the names. Fire had become a language, and Harlem was speaking it fluently. By the third night, fear shifted sides. Patterson and Dixon vanished, going underground, knowing the clock was against them. But Bumpy wasn't slowing down. He couldn't. Quick Jackson died in a gunfight meant to finish it, bleeding out while telling Marcus Cole to finish the work. When the news reached Ed Bumpy, he said nothing at first. Then he said, "Find them." His voice carried no emotion, just certainty. The war had changed shape but not direction. The cost had risen, and so had the stakes. Somewhere in the city, James Patterson and Earl Dixon were hiding, breathing borrowed air. They knew what fire sounded like now. They knew how long 4 minutes could be, and they knew Bumpy Johnson was still coming. Day 4 began with loss settling in deeper, heavier, the kind that didn't fade with sleep. Bumpy went himself to tell Mrs. Jackson that her son was dead. He stood in her small living room, hat in his hands, choosing words that could never be enough. When he finished, she cried quietly, then surprised him by straightening her back. "My boy knew the risks," she said. "He didn't die running. He died fighting." She looked Bumpy in the eyes. "Don't you dare stop now." Those words followed him all the way back to Harlem, hardening what was left of his resolve. Grief was no longer something to carry. It was fuel. By noon, word reached him that his club had been bombed. Smoke rose over 137th Street, sirens screaming. The Rhythm Club burned while people watched, fear spreading faster than the flames. Detective Brennan pulled him aside, voice low. "An explosive, planted early, 3 injured, FBI already involved." Agent Morrison arrived moments later, sharp suit, sharper eyes, asking questions he already thought he knew the answers to. 5 burned Klan members, 1 burned black N. Patterns too neat to ignore. Morrison leaned in close. "You've got 48 hours, he said. "After that, I arrest you." Bumpy didn't blink. "Coincidences," he replied calmly. Morrison walked away unconvinced. The phone rang again before the smoke cleared. Thomas Whitmore's voice came through, smug and satisfied. "For every one of mine you kill, I'll kill 10 of yours." He promised to burn Harlem piece by piece. When the line went dead, Bumpy turned to Illinois. "No more slow," he said. "We end this now." They spread bait openly. Bumpy Johnson would be at Marcus Washington's grave that night, alone, unarmed. The rumor moved exactly as planned, whispered and repeated until it reached the right ears. At 8, Bumpy stood by the fresh earth, flowers in hand, night air cold against his skin. He waited. Patterson and Dixon arrived with guns and smiles, thinking the trap was theirs. "You came alone," Patterson said. Bumpy smiled back. "Who said that?" Men rose from behind headstones, guns leveled. The gunfire was fast, brutal, final. When it stopped, Patterson lay wounded, Dixon held down. Bumpy didn't argue, he didn't lecture. Gasoline soaked into the dirt above Marcus's grave. Fire followed, 4 minutes. When it ended, only one name remained. Whitmore fortified himself, barricading a warehouse, men and weapons stacked inside like confidence. The FBI closed in, clocks ticking. Bumpy chose patience over force. He called Whitmore and offered surrender. The bait worked again while Whitmore prepared. Bumpy's men prepared better. Gasoline-soaked walls, barrels placed carefully, Molotovs ready. At 6 sharp, fire bloomed across the building in every direction. Flames swallowed exits, smoke filled lungs, screams echoed. Bumpy stood across the street and watched, timing it. 4 minutes passed, then more. The roof collapsed. When the fire died, 12 bodies remained. Whitmore was identified by a melted badge. By the time the FBI arrived, there was nothing left to prove. The papers called it an accident. Harlem called it balance. Days later, Angela Washington brought her daughters to Marcus's grave. White roses rested there already. Bumpy arrived quietly and stood with them. No words could fix anything. They didn't need to. After they left, he stayed, thinking of Marcus, of Quick, of the cost paid in fire and blood. The Klan never returned to Harlem the same way. Some disappeared, some burned. By 1950, they stopped trying altogether. It wasn't the law that ended them. It was memory and fear, and the knowledge that some debts once collected are never forgotten. The aftermath settled over Harlem like smoke after a fire, slow and heavy, impossible to ignore. People moved differently now, shoulders straighter, eyes sharper. No one spoke openly about what had happened, but everyone knew. Store owners swept their sidewalks with purpose. Mothers pulled their children a little closer. Men lingered on corners longer than usual, watching the streets like guardians. Bumpy didn't celebrate. He didn't sleep much either. Nights were quiet again, but the quiet carried weight. When he closed his eyes, he still heard the phone, still heard fire breathing. He accepted that those sounds were permanent. Some things don't leave you. They just take up residence. Illinois noticed it first, the way Bumpy paused sometimes, lost for half a second, then returned sharper than before. The war was over, but the cost had settled into everyone who survived it. The FBI lingered for weeks, asking questions they already knew the answers to and hearing replies that gave them nothing. Agent Morrison stopped by the club once after it reopened, walking through the repaired walls, studying faces. He and Bumpy spoke briefly, politely, like two men who understood the limits of each other's power. Morrison wanted justice that fit in files and courtrooms. Bumpy had delivered a different kind. Neither said it aloud. When Morrison left Harlem for good, people noticed. The pressure eased. The streets breathed again. Rumors spread beyond the neighborhood, carried by fear more than facts. Stories grow teeth when they travel, and these stories bit hard. Men who might have come north thinking Harlem was soft thought better of it. Violence didn't vanish, but it changed direction, learned restraint. Fire had taught a lesson no speech ever could. Angela Washington returned to work slowly, leaning on family and neighbors. The community took care of her daughters without discussion, meals appearing, school fees covered, coats replaced when winter came. No one framed it as charity. It was obligation. Marcus had belonged to Harlem, and Harlem remembered its own. Bumpy watched from a distance, never intruding, never forgetting. He carried Marcus with him in small ways, pausing at familiar corners, hearing echoes of laughter that no longer existed. Quick Jackson's mother received the same quiet support, pride and grief woven together tightly. She never blamed Bumpy. That surprised him more than anger would have. Some nights, he wondered if the city itself had chosen him as a tool, a necessary instrument of balance. The thought didn't comfort him, but it explained things. Violence, when it recedes, leaves behind patterns. Younger men watched carefully, learning what restraint looked like, what lines could not be crossed. Bumpy made it clear there would be no celebrating fire, no glorifying what had happened. It wasn't a victory to be repeated lightly. It was an answer to something that should never have been asked. Harlem's rules remained strict. Protection, yes. Terror, no. Anyone who misunderstood that found themselves corrected quickly, quietly. The streets didn't need another lesson written in ash. They needed stability. Bumpy understood that better than anyone. Power meant knowing when not to use it. The hardest part wasn't burning enemies. It was stopping once the message had been delivered. He forced himself to stop. That discipline mattered. Years passed. Names faded. Details blurred. But memory stayed sharp where it counted. Older men told stories carefully, never glorifying, never hiding the truth. Young people listened, wide-eyed, absorbing not just what happened, but why. The lesson wasn't about fire. It was about consequence, about what happens when cruelty mistakes silence for weakness. Harlem had been tested and had answered in its own language. That language didn't need to be spoken often. Its existence was enough. Outsiders sensed it without understanding it, like an animal sensing danger without seeing it. That was the real victory. Not bodies, not fear, awareness. Bumpy aged into his reputation the way stone ages underwater, edges softened but core untouched. His presence still quieted rooms. His words still mattered, but those closest to him saw the weight he carried, the way certain dates changed his mood, the way firelight made his eyes distant. He never spoke. About the phone call again. Not to Illinois, not to Mame. Some stories don't get told twice, they get lived with. When asked once, years later, if he regretted anything, he answered honestly, "I regret that it was necessary." He didn't regret doing it. That distinction mattered. Regret was for choices. This had been inevitability. Harlem continued, as it always did, resilient and loud and alive. Music spilled from clubs again. Children played in the streets. Life pushed forward, stubborn and bright. The scars remained, but scars are proof of survival, not weakness. Bumpy watched it all with quiet pride, knowing his role had never been to rule forever, only to hold the line when it mattered most. Others would come after him. New battles, new threats. But the foundation was set. There were places you didn't come to spread fear. There were people you didn't make examples of. Harlem had drawn that boundary in fire once. It never needed to do it again. On certain nights, when sleep came slowly, Bumpy would sit by the window and look out over the neighborhood, listening to its sounds. Laughter, arguments, music, life. He'd think of Marcus, of Quick, of all the names that never made newspapers. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't seek praise. He accepted the balance he had helped restore. Justice, he knew, didn't always wear a uniform. Sometimes it sounded like silence after screaming. Sometimes it smelled like rain washing smoke out of the air. And sometimes it meant knowing that a phone could ring at 2:47 a.m. and never ring like that again. Time moved on the way it always does, indifferent to what it leaves behind. Seasons changed. New faces appeared on corners where old ones had vanished, but certain absences stayed sharp, like missing teeth you feel with your tongue years later. Bumpy learned to live with those gaps. He learned that leadership wasn't about noise or fear anymore, but about restraint, about knowing when to let the city breathe on its own. Harlem didn't need constant protection, it needed room to heal. He gave it that, stepping back just enough, watching from the edges instead of the center. People still came to him when things felt off balance. He still listened, he still decided. But the fire stayed locked away, brought out only in memory, never again in practice. Once was enough. The phone stayed on the nightstand, same place, same number, same quiet presence. It rang plenty of times over the years, but never like that night, never with that sound. Sometimes Bumpy would look at it and feel his chest tighten for no clear reason. Trauma doesn't ask permission, it arrives and settles where it wants. He never changed the phone, never replaced it. Part of him believed that moving it would be disrespectful, like pretending the past hadn't happened. The past had happened. It always would have happened. He accepted that. The phone was a reminder, not of power, but of responsibility, of what it cost when hate was allowed to speak freely without consequence. Men who had been young during those days grew old, telling careful versions of the story. They left out details meant to protect the living, not glorify the dead. They didn't speak of screams or timings. They spoke of lines that were crossed and lines that were redrawn. They spoke of a moment when Harlem refused to bow. Children listened, sensing the weight even when they didn't understand the full meaning. Fear wasn't passed down. Awareness was. That mattered. Fear weakens over generations. Awareness sharpens. Harlem sharpened itself quietly, culturally, socially, spiritually. The neighborhood didn't become softer, it became smarter. Angela Washington's daughters grew up surrounded by stories of their father that made him larger than life but never dishonest. He had been brave. He had been stubborn. He believed in dignity. That was enough. Bumpy watched from a distance as they grew, proud and careful not to intrude. His role had ended the moment the danger passed. Anything beyond that would have been selfish. Love sometimes means absence. He understood that better than most. On anniversaries, he sent flowers without a name attached. White roses, always white roses, no explanation needed. Some gestures speak best when they don't announce themselves. The city changed, as cities do. New enemies rose. New tensions formed. Different kinds of violence tested Harlem in quieter ways. Drugs, politics, poverty dressed up in new language. Bumpy faced those battles with a different set of tools, words, deals. Pressure applied surgically instead of explosively. Fire was never again the answer. That didn't make him softer, it made him precise. The lesson of that week in 1943 wasn't that violence worked. It was that unchecked cruelty invites catastrophic response. Once the message was understood, repetition became unnecessary. Wisdom, he learned, was knowing when silence carried more weight than flames. There were moments, alone late at night, when guilt tried to slip in wearing familiar faces. Marcus, quick, names that didn't fade. Bumpy didn't push those thoughts away. He sat with them, let them exist, let them remind him that justice always charges interest. He never pretended the cost hadn't been high. He just knew the alternative would have been higher. Sometimes the world forces choices where innocence isn't an option. Only responsibility. He chose responsibility. He paid for it in sleep and scars no one could see. That was the real sentence. Not prison, not death. Memory. Harlem never built statues for what happened. There were no plaques, no official acknowledgments. That too was intentional. Some histories survive best in whispers. Loud memory invites challenge. Quiet memory invites respect. Outsiders sensed something in Harlem they couldn't name, a resistance that didn't announce itself but didn't bend either. That was enough. The Klan learned it the hard way. Others learned it by watching. Sometimes the most powerful deterrent isn't what you do again, but what everyone knows you're capable of doing if forced. As Bumpy aged, his presence became less about fear and more about gravity. Rooms still shifted when he entered, but now it was with a kind of reverence. He had held the line when it mattered most. That earned him something deeper than reputation. It earned him trust. He never abused it. Power wasted is power lost. He understood that instinctively. When younger men asked for advice, he gave it sparingly. Think long, he'd say, and remember who pays when you act. He didn't need to say more. Those who needed the lesson understood it. Near the end of his life, someone once asked him if he believed justice had truly been served. Bumpy took a long time to answer. Then he said, "Justice ain't a feeling, it's a balance." He looked away after that, conversation over. Balance had been restored once, violently, decisively. It never needed to be restored the same way again. That was the point. Justice wasn't fire. Fire was just the language used when every other language had been ignored. The phone never rang like that again. Not for him, not for Harlem. The lesson had been learned, etched into memory, carried forward without needing repetition. 6 men believed they were untouchable. History corrected them. Not out of rage, but out of necessity. The world moved on, slightly altered, slightly wiser, and somewhere deep in Harlem's foundation, beneath music and laughter and struggle, that lesson remained. You don't threaten a people and expect silence. You don't burn innocence and expect balance to stay broken. And you never forget what happens when someone answers a phone at 2:47 a.m. and decides that fear will not have the last word.